So you're a fashion brand pitching to investors for the first time, and they're asking you all sorts of questions. What's your EBITDA? What's your gross profit? What's your net income? What's your revenue? What's your turnover rate? And you find yourself clueless. You don't know how to answer. Well, I was exactly in your shoes 7 years ago. I lacked the financial literacy to be able to back up my designs and to give people the answers that they needed. On today, if you're pitching to investors, or you're speaking with a bank, or you're speaking to anyone in a financing sort of setting as a fashion brand, these are the 10 specific numbers that you need to know. Number one, and we'll start off with the basic one. This is your total revenue. Your total revenue is essentially every single dollar that is an income into your business. As a fashion brand, most likely you're making your revenue through product sales. So if you make $100,000 a year, then your revenue is $100,000. Number two is gross profit margin. And here, the simple metric of revenue comes into play because your revenue is your total income. Understanding our total income is essential because it gives us an understanding of our total volume of sales. But without context, we really don't understand how good a revenue is. So what you need to understand is your gross profit margin. This is your total revenue minus all of your cost of goods sold. Typically, your cost of goods sold are costs that are directly associated with the selling of that specific product. If you're selling a t-shirt, your cost of goods sold is going to be the labor of that t-shirt, the fabric of that t-shirt, the printing. So you take your total revenue minus everything that you've invested into actually creating the garments, and that becomes your gross profit. And then you would take that gross profit and you'll be able to calculate the margin. If your total income is $100,000, out of that $100,000, your gross profit is $40,000 after you've deducted everything to do with direct cost of goods sold for that product. Then you'd be left with 40,000. So you take 40,000 and divide that by 100,000, multiply that by 100, which gives you a gross profit margin of 40%. Number three, now you have your net profit margin. What is the difference between net profit and gross profit? Whereas with gross profit, we're essentially calculating and deducting only the costs of goods sold for the direct costs of that specific product. With your net profit, we're actually also deducting indirect costs. Your direct costs are your fabric, your labor. Your indirect costs might be your staff, your personnel, your lawyer fees, your monthly fees for your building, your yearly fees for rent. These are your indirect costs. Your net profit margin is essentially your revenue minus what you make as a net income after you've deducted all of your cost of goods sold, all of your indirect costs. And what you're left with, let's just say $10,000, you take that $10,000 and you divide that by your total revenue, and then you'll multiply that by 100. Number four is your CAC, or your customer acquisition cost. In any business, you're going to have marketing costs. You're going to have the amount of money that you invest into your marketing efforts in order to acquire customers, whether that's through meta ads, whether that's through influencer marketing, whether that's through billboard ads. You essentially take the amount of money that you've invested into any specific campaign or set of campaigns and then divide it by the number of customers that have come through that specific campaign. Now, let's just say you've invested $100,000 into a campaign and then you have 1,000 sales out of it. Take that $100,000 and then you divide that by 1,000, which will leave you with a grand total of 100. So your cost to acquire a customer would be 100 essentially in this case. Number five is your customer's lifetime value. This is a little bit more complex, and essentially you would take the average income from a given customer, you would take that number and you'd multiply that by the number of times in a year that that customer is more likely than not going to buy, and then you multiply that by the average lifetime span of a customer. Let's just say you're able to calculate that your average customer spends $100 with you. That average customer typically spends that type of money 3 times a year with your business. That customer will drop off as a customer every 5 years. So you take that $100, you take that 3, and then you take 5. So 100 times 3 times 5, and that gives you your lifetime value, or your average lifetime value of a customer. Number 6 is your burn rate, and this is essential as a startup brand, especially when it comes to the fashion business, which is typically a very capital intensive business. Your burn rate is simple. It is the amount of money that is exiting your capital. Let's just say you had $100,000 in your bank account, and every month you would make $10,000, but you're spending $20,000. You take that $10,000 and you negative, or you subtract $20,000. What we're left with is a negative $10,000 deficit. That $10,000 is your burn rate. So unless you increase your income or your revenue, or you decrease your costs or your overhead, your burn rate essentially means that within 10 months, you're going to run out of all of your money. Because if you have $100,000 in the bank, you're spending $20,000 a month and you're making $10,000 a month. After 10 months, you're going to need to recapitalize or to resupply that cash flow. Number 7 is your MRR, or your monthly recurring revenue. As a fashion brand, most likely you don't operate on a subscription model. Let's just say you have adopted a model where maybe customers purchase from you every single month. Maybe they get a discount. Maybe they get a box in the mail that has specific products. Maybe that's your business model. A lot of fashion brands have adopted this sort of business model. And for them, knowing their MRR, which means their monthly recurring revenue that they generate from monthly subscriptions, is essential because that plays into the longevity and how stable their business is long term. Let's just say you have 100 users, and on average, each user has a subscription amount of $100. Your monthly recurring revenue is going to be 100 times 100, which is going to be $10,000. That's your MRR. Next, we'll calculate your churn rate. You as a fashion brand might calculate your churn rate every quarter, or it might be every year. Let's just say that your churn rate essentially means over that year, how many customers that were typically recurring customers have you lost, divided by the total number of customers. If you lost during the year 100 customers, but you have 1,000 customers, you take that 100 and you divide that 100 by 1,000. So 100 divided by 1,000, that leaves you with a churn rate of 10%. A higher churn rate will be an indication of poor quality product, poor quality customer service, and overall a general lack of disconnection between your point of sales and your brand efforts and how your customers are experiencing the brand after they've made a purchase. And last but not least, if you've ever watched a business video before, you know that you need to know what your EBITDA is. So your EBITDA essentially stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. This essentially is a great indication of your operational profitability. As a business, ruling out any sort of direct cost like your overhead costs or your cost of goods sold. This removes everything that doesn't have to do with how well you operate your business, how well you streamline your business. It's everything to do with interest that you might be paying on a loan against the business. You'll add to it any interest you would have paid, any taxes you would have paid, any amortization costs you would have paid, and any depreciation costs you would have paid. And this gives you your overall operational profitability. I know that was a lot of numbers, but genuinely by the end of this episode, you should have a much better understanding of what revenue means, of what CAC means, of what EBITDA means. You should be able to walk away knowing how to present these numbers to investors, how to make your business more visible, more profitable, how to set specific goals and standards for your business so that you can actually make action towards being a better brand. And genuinely, I say this from the very bottom of my heart, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Fittdesign TV. Until next week's episode, stay awesome.